a comprehensive look at trends, fund profiles, and more in Exploring ETFs.
With the top-performing stock market, obviously comes top-performing sectors, and that's what we're going to talk about with our ETF Research Director, Nina Mishra, because you have also identified some top-performing ETFs
yes.
That go along with these top-performing sectors. But we'll get to that in a minute. I mean, all you can say is that stock market's looking pretty good.
It has done very well in the third quarter. The S&P 500 index was up 7.2% during the third quarter, which is its best quarterly performance in about 5 years. And it also looks very good considering that the index is up about 9% for the year as a whole. And while technology and consumer discretionary remain the best performing sectors year to date, third quarter leadership was taken over by healthcare. Healthcare was the top performing sector in the third quarter. Now, looking at the reasons behind these gains, you know, the economy continues to fire on all cylinders. Corporate earnings have been very good, and the main reason behind those two are the tax cuts. Tax cuts, you know, boosted the economy and the corporate earnings. And while investors have been somewhat worried about trade tensions, it occurred to them that probably U.S. stocks are like a safe haven in this trade turmoil, because if you look at international stock markets, most of them are down a lot this year. Chinese stocks are down about 15% this year, and compared that to U.S. stocks, it appears that U.S. economy will remain largely unaffected by all these trade tensions. So that is why also investors continue to pour money into the U.S. stocks, and with improving earnings, valuations have become more attractive because prices have gone up, but earnings have also gone up a lot. So that is why valuations, which were a concern at the beginning of this year, maybe they look more attractive now. So we will discuss the top performing sectors and also the top performing ETFs from those sectors today. And in fact, on this slide, I have the sector performance, all SPDR sector performance during the third quarter. So as I mentioned, the S&P 500 is up about 7.2% during the quarter. Healthcare was up almost 15%, very good performance. And industrials also did very well, more than 10%, because industrials were impacted earlier by trade tensions, but when investors thought, okay, U.S. economy will not be much impacted, then they, you know, kind of started putting money back into industrials. Technology continued to do well, up 9%, and consumer discretionary also up about 5% during the quarter, but not the performance was not as good as in the earlier quarter for the consumer discretionary stocks.
So the first ETF we're going to look at is the ETF MG Alternative Harvest ETF?
It is the marijuana ETF that we discussed recently. So no wonder it is up 36%. It was up 36% during the third quarter, and it remains very volatile, as I had pointed out. I had pointed out the risk when we discussed the ETF in detail. So for example, it was down almost 5% yesterday when PepsiCo said that they have no plans of investing in pot. Earlier there were reports that they may invest in CBD infused beverages, but they said because it remains illegal at the federal level, so that's why we have no plans as of now of investing in pot. But ETF MJ, because of the surge in pot stocks, it was up 36% during the quarter. It is the only pure play marijuana ETF listed in the US, has almost 700 million in assets under management, expense ratio of 75 basis points, and we had discussed the change of custodians last time when we discussed this ETF in detail. But again, if you want to look at the holdings and other details, you can go to the quote page using the link on Zacks.com. And you can look at the holdings: Aurora Cannabis, Tilray, Kronos, Canopy Growth. All these stocks have been in news and they have been surging. Aurora Cannabis because of its stocks, reported talks with Coke. Tilray because of some of the approvals for import of its medical marijuana products. So these are the hottest stocks in the market and most volatile stocks in the market as of now, which did pretty well during the third quarter.
Okay. Then there's the Healthcare Select Sector SPDR Fund.
So this is the most popular healthcare ETF on the market. And surprisingly, healthcare did very well, and healthcare is seen as a defensive sector, and even within healthcare, investors largely avoided riskier biotech areas, biotech stocks, and they poured money into, health insurers, pharmaceuticals, medical device makers, more stable, more defensive names. This is very cheap. It charges this 13 basis points for its expense ratio, and very popular, as I mentioned. It has 19.6 billion in assets under management. And again, you can go to the quote page on Zacks.com. You can read our articles on this ETF. You can also look at our research report on this ETF. And you can also go to the ETF providers homepage for this ETF, in this case State Street Global Advisors, and you can look at details like expense ratio of 13 basis points, very cheap, as I mentioned, one of the cheapest healthcare ETFs. You can look at the dividend yield, not bad, at about 1.4%, and you can also look at the holdings. Johnson & Johnson, the healthcare giant, has more than 10% weight in the portfolio. United Health, a large insurer, and Pfizer, a pharmaceutical company, they have about 7% weight each in the portfolio. And you can look at the sub-industry allocation. Pharma's about 32%, healthcare providers and services about 23%, and healthcare equipment and suppliers about 22%. Biotech, relatively small weight in the portfolio at about 17%.
All right, and apparently aerospace and defense did well, well enough to merit a highlighting of the SPDR S&P Aerospace and Defense ETF.
Yes, so this was up 14%. So these aerospace and defense stocks have continued to do well since Trump's election, because a larger portion of defense budget allocation. Yes. And of course, there are geopolitical tensions all over the world. They had done much better last year because global economy was picking up. So that is why the aerospace side of the business the commercial side of the business had done pretty well last year. But this year, during the third quarter, these companies kind of picked up. Earlier, they were somewhat hurt by trade and tariff-related concerns, companies like Boeing, Lockheed Martin. But during the third quarter, they did pretty well. Now, this is an equal-weighted ETF, actually modified equal weighting. So it has about 40% exposure to large cap, 40% to mid caps, and 20% to small cap. And all those holdings are in almost equal weights. So that means, whereas in the market cap weighted ETF for aerospace and defense stocks, Boeing, which is the largest holding, has almost 12% weight. In this, Boeing has about, I think, 3 or 4% weight. Let's take a look. So again, let's go to the quote page on Zacks.com, and through there, let's go to the external home page. Looking at the holdings, you see all the familiar companies, Boeing, Spirit Aerosystems, Lockheed Martin, but you can see that they are in almost equal weights. So equal weighting kind of largely eliminates single company risk. So when Boeing was not doing so well, the market cap weighted ETF was more affected than this ETF. very reasonable expense ratio of 35 basis points, and this is also very popular. It has about 1.7 billion in assets under management.
All right, so let's see, as we always do, how these all stack up to the broad market.
So on this chart, you can see that the bot ETF MJ was the top performer, but you can also see the volatility in the price movement. But it ended the quarter up about 36%, and the healthcare ETF and aerospace and defense ETFs that we discuss both up about 14–15%, whereas the S&P 500 index gained a little more than 7% during the quarter.
You might want to say the pot ETF was really high.
Yes.
That's a bad joke.
Yes.
Do you own any of these?
I do not.
All right. Don't forget, more ETF information on Zacks.com. Go to the home page and use the Funds tab in the top toolbar to access that information. And also don't forget Nina's ETF podcast. That's on the podcast page of Zacks.com. You access that by going all the way to the bottom of the home page and clicking on the word podcast. With Nina, I'm Terry Ruffalo.